Great, come on up.
Diane, if you want to come join me, that's a part of the program, you and me. Well, while she's coming up, last year, as we all recall, the winner of the Heights Humanitarian Award was, in fact, Zainab Bangura. And we spent probably 6 months sending this out over, came back, because it said, addressee unknown. So we're just so delighted you came here today. So I would be glad, I'll just share this with you. This is what you were. In fact, Josh, why don't you come up here? Let's kind of replicate what we're trying to do. She was involved in a variety of other things. So, Josh, why don't you get a picture there? Lori?
Yep.
Okay.
She was busy trying to run for president.
I'm right up here, guys. Can you look here? Thank you.
This is intimidating. A lady of your stature, I'm thrilled to be in your presence on so many grounds. And so I was asking questions today of some of your colleagues of what I should ask you or what they would want me to ask you that they could learn. So your good esteemed friend, Ambassador Rapp, I approached him. And he reminded me that, in fact, as the Undersecretary, United Nations Special Representative on Sexual Violence and Conflict, that in 2014 you were at a special conference in London. And you were the keynote speaker. And there was a guest there named Angelina Jolie. And he wanted me to ask what you thought of her. Now, that was his question.
I think Angelina Jolie, together with William Hague, who was then the Foreign Secretary for the UK, together launched this prevention against sexual violence, the UK office. And I think the good thing about working, as much as difficult as it was when people at that stature, film stars, they add their voice to an issue, it opened doors. I remember William Hague as Foreign Minister, we had a G8 summit. And William Hague wanted the G8 agenda to include sexual violence and conflict. So he said, I need to bring these two women, Angelina Jolie, and of course, everybody comes. So all the foreign ministers of the G8 came. I was given the responsibility to sit next to the Russian foreign minister to make sure he keeps quiet. He doesn't criticize the agenda. So she brought a momentum. And I think those were years when we had about 150 countries that signed a declaration to commit themselves to fight against sexual violence and conflict. It's not very easy. Right. You have the Iraqi Prime Minister, all sorts of people, So what we do whenever we want to visit a country where, we know the head of state is very reluctant, we take her along. so they opened the doors for us. So working with her, she was very, very committed. She was very committed until, and she wanted to do something. She wanted to use her star power, to bring people on the table, to get people to agree on things that they don't want to agree to. Because once Angelina Jolie stands there and says, oh, yes, I'm great. And you give them anything to sign, they will sign, they don't even bother to read. So we got a lot of signatures to commit. And that was very good,
Well, there's a very good YouTube piece of William Hague walking in with her. I'd never seen him walk so fast or so proudly. So you went from being a star in the insurance world to being what you became. How did that happen? What was there? Was there an aha moment?
I think I grew up as an only child to my mom, very traditional, illiterate, never went to school. My father was a Muslim cleric, and I was very close to him, but as a Muslim cleric, he had to follow, I don't want to say the doctrine, the policy, and that is not to educate girl child. I learned the Quran first, Arabic school, before I went to the English school. And at the age of 12, my father wanted me to leave school to get married. My mom said no.
12.
12 years old. My mom said no. So my father threw us out, my mom and myself. So we went to the village. And my mom instilled in me that this is just a time. The only thing that can get us out of this situation is for you to have a good education. So she did everything she could to get me educated. It was a very difficult, and the last year in high school, she couldn't pay the fees anymore. I had a very lovely principal. She wrote to the government, as I was the senior prefect. I have this brilliant girl in school, but her mom couldn't pay her fees anymore. So the government paid my fees. And then I took the exams. I went to, we call it sixth form, which is like college here in the US. And it was very difficult because my mother had to sell everything she had. And she had to have the assistance of, well, I went to high school. She couldn't, to Form 6, 2 years. She couldn't afford the uniform. So somebody who went a year before me, left a year before me, gave me our old uniform. But she had instilled this thing in me that you have to get an education. It's the only thing that will take you out of this poverty we are. Then my mom died. When I finished university, I went to Nottingham University, and I came back home, and I lost my mom. And I had to go to the funeral. I had to track my father. We went to the funeral, and my father had to take charge. And this is a man who's left us for so long, but then the tradition demands that he has to be in charge of the funeral. I was not married then, but I was living with my husband. I've got a son. And they said, no, you can't. He can't do anything at your mother's funeral because you're not legally married. So I had to leave my mom's cups and actually go and get married. And then once we finished the wedding, traditional wedding, we came back and he took control. And I think that was very difficult for me to understand. How can I accept this? So I went to Freetown, the head of the UN. I spoke to a couple of people and they said, you talk to the UNDP. The head of the UNDP was then Mrs. Nuru. She was from Tanzania, so an African woman. So I made an appointment and I went to her. And then I spoke to her about my experience, and then she laughed. She said, that is what you call women's rights. She said, you have a problem in Sierra Leone. In as much as our constitution says we are all equal, but the constitution also recognizes the religious and customary laws. So actually your father has a right, so we have. So to cut a long story short, that's how I became interested in women's rights issues. And I started a campaign, started an organization called Women Organized for a Morally Enlightened Nation. Just as Sierra Leone was going into a military government, there was a coup. And then I realized that you can't fight for women's rights under a dictatorship. So I turned my attention against the government and tried to throw them out, insisted that we have to have democracy. And then while we were doing this argument, the United States, they have what they call now, they call it the Young African Leaders Program. But it used to have a different name. So the lady who was the public relations officer, Kiki Monshi, she's in California, she's retired. She kept listening to me as I got involved in this debate about democracy. And she said to me, you know, you have a potential. She said, but what you will do is I need you to go to the United States. They have what they call International Visitors Program then, which was a 6-week program. So I came to the US, and the title of the program was Grassroots Pluralism and Grassroots Democracy. So I spent 6 weeks traveling the length and breadth. And the one thing I took back home was, as diversified as the US was, but they had certain values that held them together. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from. These principles and values protect people and gives you a voice. So I went back to Freetown and I went to the American ambassador and I said, I want to work for democracy. She looked at me. Are you crazy? You are living under a military government. So I said, I do want to work for you. I said, because there is something that tells me this is what we need in Sierra Leone. So she said, okay. So they gave me my first grant, which was $25,000. I set up an organization and I started working. Because my mother comes from a grassroots level, she was a market woman, so I started working with the market women. And I realized our society, because the government had collapsed at the national level, the people, the citizens, set up their small networks. So I went and studied those networks, even though the leaders were not elected, but they were respected. So I got the leaders, the American embassy gave me space, and I started training them and trying to indoctrinate them on democracy. And then once I was content enough that they were ready, I took on the governments and went into the streets. And so once we had and at that time the war started going on in Sierra Leone. And once we were able to have an election, I gave up my insurance job. I set up a whole new organization working on human rights and democracy. And then the war was at its height, started documenting the atrocities, monitoring, documenting, and reporting the atrocities that were happening in Sierra Leone. Outside and at the back of I had people deployed behind rebel lines. So I was reporting on atrocities of the war and atrocities here. So I started providing all that kind of support. And then that's how the rest of it is history.
Being female, did you run into a lot of glass ceilings as you were advocating and agitating? Was that something that was part of your experience?
Oh yes, I come from a very traditional culture where women don't have voices. Up to today, as I speak to, women cannot be traditional leaders where I come from. And my society is very, so it was very, very difficult, you know, because people were just difficult to accept. But I had one philosophy, I think it was, who was it who said that at the banquet table there are no reserved seats. I learned very early that you don't have to wait until you are invited. If I want this, example, the World Bank went to Sierra Leone, they were discussing something on local government. I don't wait for invitations. I go to meetings, I participate. And so people, I think they were so shocked how abrasive I was. And sometimes they just don't talk. But I don't wait for you to ask me to sit on the table. I believe that if I wait, I will wait for the rest of my life. So there was a lot of obstacles, but for me, the result is what matters. Because I needed to break, you know, the barriers. I needed to break the culture of denial, the culture of silence. So I needed to be very aggressive in dealing with it. And one of the most interesting things is that everybody thought, she doesn't behave like a woman. I remember one of the interesting experiences, they wrote so much about me in the paper, the way I was behaving and all sorts of things. And I sat in the sitting room with my husband, and I said to him, I said, why is it that people just think that I don't behave like a woman? And he turned to me and looked at me. Don't you know that you have male hormones? And I said to him, oh my God. And I just realized I had a lot of these battles. But I think that's the courage I had, because I had a lot of support from international people. During the height of the war in Sierra Leone, the American ambassador, the British High Commissioner, they gave me a lot of protection. They went with me to play. Sometimes I couldn't sleep in my house, but they went with me for long. They made it known that they had my back. That was one thing that helped me in my country in a difficult time, because the international community supported me greatly.
You have something in your house, an inscription on what looks like a wooden carving. I'm reading this. It says, let your faith be bigger than your fear. Is that a mantra of is that something you believe in?
I'm a very spiritual person at heart. You know, I'm Muslim, but I also believe in the Bible. And I think that's what my faith has kept me going, because I always believe this is destiny. This is what I was chosen to do. And I think there is a bigger being over there who looks after me. So I can even go into the lion's den, because I just have that courage that once I do it, and once I do it with all my heart, and I do it not because of me, there's something that protects me. So my faith is very strong in what I do, my faith in God, and that I do it for humanity, because whatever I do, there are lots of people who benefit. And I benefited from a lot of the goodwill of a lot of people, and that took me the long way. So.
And you believed in the goodwill of a lot of people, and being from Sierra Leone and seeing the various atrocities, there was a court, of course, created, the Special Tribunal of Sierra Leone. Give me your best story about David Crane.
Setting up the special courts was not easy. From my experience now, the rule of law is the first victim of any conflict. And Sierra Leone, we had about almost 3 decades of military rule and dictatorship. And so the rule of law was completely destroyed. And so when they set up the special courts, I think it's so good that I didn't realize he actually worked, he was a military person. Now I realize why he succeeded. Because he was marching like a military man, into Sierra Leone. Because the courts in Sierra Leone, the interesting thing about the court was he tried supporters of the government and tried rebel groups. And to get the governments to accept that they committed atrocities, even if they don't accept, but to get them to surrender their own people was one of the most difficult things. Mm-hmm. Fode Sanko was very unpopular, but Inga Norman was treated like a demigod, because people felt that without him we could not have actually had peace in Sierra Leone. So David doesn't take prisoners. I have to tell you. And so his relationship, he intimidated everybody, including my president at that time, because it was a straight line, he just moves on. And I think with all the prosecutors in Sierra Leone, we were very lucky to have David started with the special courts, and Steve and everybody followed up. But I remember my first time I met David, I told her I was fearless. I could do anything. But when I met David in his office, after they'd spoken to me that they want me to try to, because everybody was given evidence, was talking about this issue, forced marriage. And the judges were very confused. I was his bushwife. And they said, what is this? They knew that a crime had been committed, because when the girls were given the story of how they were treated, what happened to them, but they said, what is this? So everybody said to David, you have to talk to Zainab. She's been documented. So she's the only person you can talk to who will give you a correct story and to tell you exactly what happened, the phenomenon, And so they spoke to my David. And that was the first time I was frightened of somebody, I have to tell you, because he really intimidated me. I don't easily get intimidated.
I can't imagine it.
Exactly. But I was very impressed, and I think he was the one who gave me the courage that you can do this. And this is what we want, and we believe that you know exactly what it is and you can write the story. So he intimidated everybody, so I was not the only one. So when you talk to the police, I say, oh, that David Crane, my God, he's trouble. He's trouble. Everybody was afraid of him in Sierra Leone when the special court. Because there's so much myth about the special court as if it's come to try the government. Because there was so much impunity. Nobody thought this was a crime. People did things because they didn't realize, this was something that they could be punished for. They could be held accountable. So once the time came that the special court started operation, it was very difficult. But he was able to get the government to accept everything, and actually to make the special court very independent, because I don't know whether they were aware. Before they came, there was this argument that the special court should be under the Supreme Court, and because they wanted our judges to be part of it. But they said no, eventually they agreed, and they said the special court should be independent. And so David, as I said, all of the prosecutors in Sierra Leone did a fantastic job, because it was also an educational process for us. It restored lots of confidence in the rule of law. It hired a lot of our local lawyers, you know, and they had a lot of interaction. They were not like isolated. They worked very closely with the civil society. They created an outreach, you know, office which worked very well and actually brought the people into the court for the people to feel that they owned the court. And the court was actually working for the people of Sierra Leone. So it was a very interesting experience. And I think that later on, people looked at it as one of the best examples of how it was. And that's mostly was because of the prosecutors, because they realized that the special courts would be unpopular if it was not owned by the people of Sierra Leone. And so one of the things that they did was making sure that the people feel that this court was come not only to give them justice, but they own the court. And the court listens to them, and it reports to them. And that was a very good example that he sets.
You were gathering all of this information not in anticipation that there would ever be a court. I assume the RUF wasn't very happy with you. You spoke pretty brazenly about their atrocities. Did you get fear for your life at all? I mean, you're kind of out there.
Oh, yes. So there's several times, I wouldn't say attempts were made, but I had a lot of threats. But I think the worst time was January 6th, when the rebels actually entered the city.
What year was this?
1996.
Okay.
1996, I think. 99, yes. When the RUF entered the city. You know, I think they should have taken the city before Christmas, but Sarge Musa died at Waterloo. So they stopped at Waterloo. So for about a week or 2 weeks or more than that, the city was under siege. We were doing all sorts of advocates. The government had brought in the Kamajos in towns. People were shot, were killed, people were disappearing. And then the 5th of January, I was informed by the now Minister of Education, who was then the Secretary General of the Teachers Union, that he thinks the rebels were going to enter the city. He was living in Kisi. He came over to the West End, or he lived in the East End. He came over to the West End, and that's where he spent the night. And I got a call at about midnight from the president of the Labour Congress. And he said that they've entered. And that night, I was on VOA and BBC, you know, giving an interview, talking about, you know, what it will mean if the city falls, and talking all sorts of negative things against the rebel. Because we had a very strong civil society network, we had each other's telephone. So once the city fell in the East End, people kept calling me to say, this is where they've arrived, this is where. So by the time they got to Liverpool Street, which is the center of Freetown, we then were able to pick up their strategy, which was to use the people as human shield, you know, to get all the people in front and the rebels to be at the back, so that if the Nigerians go on a counter-attack, they will kill the people. So we informed the Nigerians. By the time they got to Congo Cross, because every strong old checkpoint collapsed, so the Nigerian then mobilized, retreated, and mobilized at Congo Cross Bridge. And then once they arrived there, the mobs arrived, the Nigerians got all the people to lie down. And then they walked over them and attacked the rebels. There was a massive, massive slaughter of people. Because they stretched across the city, Congo Cross, Tengbe Town, Hill Station, my house was like less than 500 yards to where the lines were drawn. They knew that I was leading the resistance. And as they were singing my name and telling people that we'll get her, we'll rape her and we'll kill her, people started calling me. So I called the Nigerians, and they had armored cars in front of my house. That, for me, that's the most frightening time of my life, because they came literally 200 yards from my house, and the bullets were flying. And for 2 nights, I couldn't sleep. I was in my sneakers, my jeans. And on the 3rd night, I wrote the names of all my friends, their telephone numbers overseas, and everybody. And I had some cash, and I gave it to my son. I said, once the gates was hit, you leave. And for 2-3 days, the lights went off, the telephone system went off. We couldn't even cook in our houses. because they would see the smoke. The third day or the fourth day, when a friend of mine, who was then Julius Spencer, came knocking at my gate, I thought the rebels were here. I asked my son to jump, and Julius shouted, and he said, it's me, Julius. He came with some Nigerians, and they said the government has fled. So the president has run away, the ministers have left. So we had to take charge. For 1 week, we ran the country. But that was the closest I came to, and I was very frightened. So up to about a month, they had us Nigerians in the vicinity of my street. And we had to get out when they started pushing the Nigerians, and we had to collect the bodies, the dead bodies, the corpses. We had to bury them in mass graves. And the British sent a military ship with pesticide or whatever to spray the city, to clean. We had to wash the streets because the dogs and vultures were eating the dead bodies. So that was the closest. Yes, several times they had attempt. In the end, Fode Sanko and I became friends when he came to town because it came to a time when I was the only person who could confront him. Everybody was afraid of him. It was a very difficult period.
Well, and that only was equaled by your meeting with David Crane. So, you know, many people admire you. I mean, you are really a role model for so many folks. Do you have role model? Did you have somebody as you reflect on your career, you say, that's an individual I would like to emulate, or somebody who was special?
I was an history student. I read a lot about people, you know, who had done lots of work to transform their countries. And I look after people, of course, for a long time. They call me the Iron Lady back home. They still do call me the Iron Lady because of Margaret Thatcher. I respect strong people, people who stand up for their beliefs, people who don't get influenced by others. So when I read history book to Margaret Thatcher, whether the Bismarck, all of those people, is the people who decided this is the right thing, that no matter what happens, this is what I'll pursue. And for me, that's the most important thing. People don't need to agree with me. I always say in Sierra Leone, I don't need you to love me. I need you to respect me for who I am, but not to think I like her. Because if you want people to like you, then you have to do what they want. And a lot of time, what they want is not something that you agree with. So I don't make a lot of friends. I have very few friends back home. Back home, I don't think I have 3 or 4 people I visit their homes, because at the end of the day, I have such strong conviction to myself that I disagree with a lot of people. People feel you're too strong, you're hard-hearted, you know, you don't listen. No. You and I will be friends if we share a lot of values together. And those are the people I make friends. And so even in history, these are the people I believe in, people who believe in certain things and pursue it to the end. It doesn't matter what other people say about them.
I was reading someplace that among the people you admire is President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia and Angela Merkel. Did they fit those definitions?
Yes. Ellen is more than a friend. She's almost like a sister to me.
Yeah.
You know, we met together when we started the Soros Foundation in Paris. So since then, I've stayed in her place. I respect her a lot because she went through hell in Liberia before she became president. She never gave up. I met her when she was struggling after the Samildo incident. Then we became friends. And since then, we're like friends. She just visited me because she knew I was sick. She came to see me in Freetown. I think in November, I'm going to visit her in her farm. Angela Merkel, I know her. You know, when she had I met her when I was foreign minister. She invited me to an activity, and then most recently she invited me in Germany when she was chair of the G7. We went there. She's very strong. She doesn't bend, you know, as you yourself said. So I like her very much as a woman leader.
You're a lover of jazz.
My God, where did you get all these stories? You must have done your work.
I've been working this for a month.
Yeah.
So who's your big jazz instrumentalist? Who's your hero?
Kenny Rogers.
Who's that?
Kenny Rogers.
Okay. So if we were really good, we'd be playing that right now. But yeah.
Yeah, whenever I visit my dentist in New York, they always play me jazz music while he's working on my teeth so that I don't feel the pain.
That's good. Well, that's good. So you get interviewed quite a bit. What's the question that you think these folks would be most interested in the answer to that I haven't asked?
Well, you know, in the course of my work, I've met lots of people, and especially when you work on people who commit atrocities. And I remember the experiences with meeting some of these people, especially the armed groups and the governments, and how you engage them, how you get them. You remember when I met the South Sudan president, the foreign minister said, "You terrorize my president." He was stunned because he talks too much, and everybody had warned me that, don't allow him to start talking, or else you'll not be able to engage him. So by the time I left, the foreign minister said to me, "Madam, you terrorize my president." And I think that's an experience I had to learn. When you deal with a crazy person like Fode Sanko, you needed to be able to make sure you don't allow them to talk. Yeah, and when I met the FAC, oh my God, they can talk you under the table. They talk non-stop. When I met the FAC in Cuba.
Sorry.
So it's a very interesting experience working with all these different class of people, armed groups, heads of states. It's very challenging.
What's been the most rewarding part of what you've accomplished? I mean, you continue to do so, but as you reflect today in 2018, you'd say, I got this award here, and maybe one of the reasons I got that award was because of X. How would you fill in that?
I think for me, my best achievement was working in the DRC. When I was interviewed for the job, the Secretary General said to me, "We've never got President Kabila to accept that his military people are committing atrocities." He said, "It's our biggest headache, the DRC, because they were having like 250,000 women were being raped so regularly." And I listened. That was the only country he complained to me. And when I got the job, I went to see him 3 months after that. He said almost the same thing to me. So I knew that the DRC was very close to his heart and he wanted something to be done. And I decided that if I do not achieve anything, I think one of the first things I have to achieve is actually getting President Kabila to accept that atrocities were being committed in the DRC and by his military. So I worked very hard as an African whom I realized I have to use all the tactics I have. And I did my planning for like 6 months. And I went to the DRC for 2 weeks. And I said, I can't meet him at the beginning. If I do, he will deny. I need to travel in the country, meet the victims, meet other people, and actually learn a lot about the country within the country. So when I meet him, I can have very clear example. So the meeting was arranged, and it was very interesting because the SRSG had in Kinshasa had not seen Kabila for about a year. He just doesn't talk. So I went there, and I was normally in our position, the SRSG is your host. So he goes with you to all meetings. This one, he didn't want to go. I didn't have a problem. The deputy SRSG accompanied me in all my meetings. Once it was confirmed that I was going to meet Kabila the second week, the SRSG saw it as an opportunity to actually also meet Kabila. So I went to the meeting. I realized that So I went to him and he gave me 30 minutes. I ended up with 1 hour, 30 minutes with him. So I said to him, I have not come to talk to you as a UN representative. I've come to talk to you as an African woman who has gone through conflict in my own country and witnessed it. And I had to deal with it. And I explained to him some of the experience on our countries. And we sat and I spoke for like 20 minutes. And then he said to me, "Do you have time?" So I said, "Of course, Mr. President, I'm at your disposal." For the first time, he spoke for 25 minutes. He knew everything that was happening in his country. He knew who were committing the atrocities. And he said, and then he told me that I couldn't do anything because I don't have the power. So at the end of the day, we had an agreement. This and this are what I want you to do. And I will do this and this in return. So we struck a deal. In the 2 years I worked with the DRC, we succeeded in prosecuting 150 military, including a general. The sexual violence committed by soldiers reduced by 50%. When we had a conference in London, I got them to invite the defense minister, and he didn't want to come. I spoke to President Kabila, I asked him to come, and he was so intimidated because all the NGOs were demonstrating against the DRC. So I said to him, I said, the DRC government has never had a voice. You have to. He said, what do I say? I said, don't worry. I got him, my staff, to prepare a speech for him. I sat with him to read the speech. His posture, because he was very aggressive, I said no. And he even started complaining about the ICC. I said, no, that's not your problem. You don't complain about the ICC. You talk about your problem. And then at the end of it, I say, make a commitment that you will never stand by. Accept responsibility that, yes, crimes has been committed by the military, but you make a commitment. You know, we set up a very strong military prosecution division in the army, which became stronger than the civilian prosecution team. And so the last General Assembly, or the second to last that President Kabila went before I left the UN, he invited me in his hotel. Then he said to me, thank you very much. I got the parliament to have a subcommission, a committee in parliament that addresses sexual violence. So everything I asked him to do, he did. And for me, that was a great satisfaction because he never, the Secretary General went there, he refused to discuss sexual violence. My predecessor went there 3 days, she went 3 times. President Kabila refused. But I was able to get him to accept and take responsibility. And the first time I went to the DRC, the chief of army staff refused to talk to me. President Kabila had to call him, and he called me to ask for a meeting. So that was one of the lessons I learned. I had a very difficult time with South Sudan. I met the president 5 times. I met the rebel leader 5 times. It was very difficult. Iraq was also very difficult with the prime minister. So I had a lot of difficult, but the important issue is at the end of the day, they all accepted that yes, we take responsibility. But I was never able to get them to move the next step. But at least with the DRC, he moved and he made a lot of changes. But I was working with Civil Rap to actually have a court. We were not able to get it before we all left. But that was my best pleasure in working.
Well, he thanked you, and we thank you for all that you've meant to all the international law dialogue works and for receiving this specific award. Thank you very much.